So, reproduction in a flowering plant. So, usually in the flowering plant, okay, whatever sexual reproduction takes place, that is by how? Involving a transformation of diploid sporophytic cells into haploid gametophytic cells. So this process happens by subsequent meiosis, whereas what happens is when this haploid gametes again fuse together, then they are going to form what? A diploid zygote. Okay, and finally whatever the zygote is there, it is converted into a plant body. So usually if we consider the flowering plants, they undergo this type of sexual reproduction. Okay, so they will be having specialized reproductive organs for the thing, which is nothing but called as flowers. Fine. So we have to know the structure of the flower in order to know how the reproduction process happens in plants. So let's see the structure of flower. So if you consider this flower morphologically, okay, means externally if you see them, it is nothing but a modified shoot, which does this sexual reproduction for the process of formation of flower and then an entire plant. So typically if you see a shoot will be having what? Nodes, internodes and all those stuff. So from there, basically if you see this is suppose a plant, okay, small. So here you will be having nodes, then internodes, right? Apical meristem, then the leaves which will start forming from the ends. So all these things. Okay, so this is nothing but what? A modified shoot. Okay, so if you consider a structure of a flower, commonly it is having what? A long stalk, which is called as pedicel. Okay, and for example, if this is the stalk, then upper part here, what it will be having is a swollen part. It will be like this. And then from here only, whatever the leaves, the flower which is there, it will grow. So this thing is called as what? Pedicel. And the swollen part is called as what? Thalamus or receptacle. Okay, then coming towards the next parts of flower. So what are the different parts in a flower? So typically there are two types like angiosperms and gymnosperms. So gymnosperms are non-flowering plants, so they won't come under this category. So here we'll be considering only which type of flower? Angiospermic flower. Angiospermic flower. So usually a flower is having 4 whorls. Which are what? Floral whorls. So what are these 4 whorls? First is the calyx. Second, corolla. third, androecium, and fourth, gynoecium. Okay, so out of this, whatever the first two are there, they are the lower whorls, and they are usually sterile. Okay, and the other two is the upper whorls. They are usually fertile because they help, these two whorls only help in the reproduction purpose. So calyx and corolla is acting as what? Accessory whorls. Means they are not that much essential for reproduction to happen. But androecium and gynoecium are considered as what? Essential whorls. Okay, so this is the basic difference. Now coming towards each whorl in detail. So the first one is the calyx. So calyx is nothing but the outermost whorl. Okay, so usually it is having a green leaf-like structure, which is considered as sepals. That is a green leaf. Okay, so sometimes what happens is the calyx, sometimes they have petals, sometimes they have sepals. So suppose the sepals are what? They are nothing but the green in color, correct? So sometimes when they become colored ones, it is called as what? Petaloids. Okay, so whenever a sepal, which is usually green in color, but in some cases when they become colored and act as a petals, then they are called as what? Petaloids. Okay, so whatever the sepals are there, they will enclose into a bud. For example, if this is a bud, so you will see here green color sepals will be present. So what the sepals are initially doing is nothing but it is giving protection to that particular bud, because in buds it's very delicate stage. So hence what the sepals will do, it will enclose the bud and protect them. Okay, then the second one is corolla. So corolla means it is nothing but the second whorl, okay, which has petals. So petals are generally what? Bright colored and they produce fragrant. Not all flowers are fragrant, but most of the flowers, they produce what? Fragrant as well. So because of this corolla is what? A colored petals, correct? So because of the colored petals and the fragrance, the pollination process occurs. Okay, so these petals help to attract the insects for the pollination, and hence pollination takes place. Okay, but there are certain times when this petal and sepal come together. Then this condition is called as perianth. So when the petals and sepals fuse together, then they form a floral thing called as a perianth. Then the third one is androecium, the first essential whorl. So androecium is basically a male reproductive system which consists of stamens. So if you consider the stamen, this has been divided into two parts, or it is made up of two parts, that is filament, anther. Now what is the function of this filament and anther? Filament, what it will do is, this is going to support the anther at its tip. Whereas anther is what? It is a bilobed structure containing 4 microsporangia. So this microsporangia is nothing but pollen sac. Okay, so if you see, this is how the anther looks like. Okay, so here there will be 4 parts like this. Okay, that is what 4 sporangia it will be having, from where the pollen grains will be formed. So usually pollen grains are male part, okay, which is produced by the stamen, which has anther in them, and which is consisting of what? 4 microsporangia, and microsporangia is nothing but the pollen sac. Okay, so whatever portion is there which is connecting this anther and the filament, they are known as what? Connective. So yeah, so what happens is, in each of the 2 lobes, they are bilobed usually. Bilobed means what? Here like this you can see the 2 parts they have been, okay, divided into. So therefore it's called as bilobe, and hence it is having what? 2 pollen sacs. So even though if they are having 2 pollen sacs, they are having what? Plenty of grains in them, pollen grains in them. Okay, so basically these pollen grains are called as what? Microspores. Because they are produced in microsporangia, they are called as microspores. So pollen grains are nothing but yellow dusty powder which you will find in most of the flowers. Okay, so this is the male reproductive organ of a flower, which is androecium. Next one is the female reproductive organ, which is gynoecium. So this is a female organ. Okay, so you will find this gynoecium in the central position of a flower on receptacle. And this particular gynoecium consists of what? 3 parts, such as ovary, style, and stigma. So there I told you that male part was stamen. Here these things are called as carpels. So usually what is this ovary, style, and stigma? So ovary is nothing but a swollen part at the base you find is called as the ovary. Okay, it's a basal swollen part in which the ovule is going to be developed. That is the seed, which further gives rise to a flower. Then second one is what? Style. So style basically is an elongated long structure Okay, this connects what? Stigma and ovary. And the third one is stigma, which you will find at the terminal end, which is having what? Lot of hairy, or you can say sticky things. For what? So that whenever the pollen grain will fall on the stigma, it should get trapped. So for that purpose only, it may be hairy or sticky. Okay, so that it can hold the pollen grains during the pollination. During pollination. So these are basically the three parts of the female organ, which is gynoecium. So now, based upon this, the presence of this reproductive organs, usually there are few types of flowers. Okay, types of flowers. That is, first one is unisexual. So unisexual flower means what? Only one reproductive part is present. So that may be either male or female. Okay, that is either stamen or either carpel. For example, papaya, or you can take watermelon. So what will be the bisexual flower? A bisexual flower is nothing but bi means two. So obviously here both the reproductive part, that is stem and carpel, both will be present. Okay, so bisexual is also termed as hermaphrodite. For example, hibiscus or rose, etc. Okay, so these are what the two types depending upon either male, female, or both the reproductive parts are present. So now, in order for this fertilization to happen, it requires a process which is called as pollination. And what is pollination? In simple terms, it is nothing but the process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of same or different flower. Okay, so simple terms is transfer of pollen grains. So obviously pollen grains is produced by the anther. So from the anther it should transfer to the stigma. So that may happen either in the same plant, same flower, or into a different plant, different flower. So usually this process of pollination is carried out in two ways. Either it may be a self-pollination or a cross-pollination. So let's see what is this self and cross-pollination. Now under the self-pollination, again you're having two types. Okay, that is autogamy and nitonogamy. Okay, whereas this in this cross-pollination, there are certain agents which help in them, which is called as abiotic and biotic agents. So cross-pollination is also termed as allogamy or xenogamy. Okay, so these are what the alternative terms, okay, which you can use for the cross-pollination. So if you see self-pollination, basically only a single plant will be involved. But in the cross-pollination, cross means what? Obviously over here, it will involve two different species. Means from one species of the pollen grain that will reach the other plant for the pollination purpose. So let's see this in detail. As the first one is the self-pollination. So self-pollination means what? It involves the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. Okay, transfer of pollens from anther to stigma of same flower. Okay. So in this, I told you there are two types, autogamy and nittogamy. Now, what is the difference between autogamy and nittogamy? So autogamy means here the pollens will be transferred from anther of a flower to stigma of same flower. See, in the self-pollination, same species plant only will get pollinated. You cannot use any different species as of like that of cross-pollination. So over here, in the self-pollination, what will happen is either it may happen on the means anther to stigma of same flower, or it can also consider or choose what? Another flower but of the same plant. Okay, because if you see, if you consider this as a plant, so here many flowers will be there, correct? So either in the same flower only this will fall and it will reproduce. Otherwise, from this anther, it will fall into the second flower of the same plant. Okay, so this is called as what? Self-pollination. But autogamy means what? Here, whatever the transfer is there, it will take place in same flower. So hence, the pollen grains from anther to stigma of same flower. Whereas nittogamy means what? Nittogamy means pollen grains are transferred from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Okay, so from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of same plant. Okay, so usually you will find them in unisexual flowers, male. Okay, so in that one will be having male part and other will be having female part. Correct. So in unisexual or monoecious conditions only you will find this nittogamy. Okay, so actually when there is a self-pollination, there are certain merits also as well as demerits. So what are the merits and demerits of the same? So merits means of the self-pollination is because the pollen grains fall on the same plant species, hence what happens is pollens are not wasted. And hence what happens is the purity of the generation is maintained. Purity of the generation is maintained. But there are also few demerits for it. That is because that pollen grains are self-pollinating because on the same plant. So hence you will not get any new or healthier varieties. Plus self-pollination will happen continuously in those plants. So hence they will become what? Or they will give rise to what? A weaker progeny. Or you can say weaker seeds or plants. Okay, so depending upon the unisexuality or the bisexuality of a flowers only, self-pollination are considered. Okay, for example, if it's a bisexual flower, so obviously both the things will be present in the same plant and there is no need of a cross-pollination to happen. Okay, so this is all about what? The self-pollination. Now the next one is the cross-pollination. So cross-pollination means what? Transfer of pollens, pollen grains from flower of one plant to stigma of another, and I told you it's also called as xenogamy. Okay, so in the cross pollination there is no any other terms, but obviously here also there are merits as well as demerits. For example, what will be the merit over here? The opposite, the demerits which are considered in the self pollination will be the merits of the cross pollination. So here you can say that whatever progenies are there, they are healthier. Okay, then you will get new varieties. But there is also a demerit, that is pollen grains are wasted. And in order for this cross pollination to happen, it is all dependent upon what? Agents. So if the agents, whoever is carrying out this pollination process, like wind, water, animals, whatever it is, so if they are not properly doing this, then the process which is there, you cannot fully, what do you say, define that particular process. Okay, means it may be a failure also, it may not happen or may happen. So these are what the demerits of a cross pollination. So if it's a self pollination, then obviously the pollination is going to happen 100%. But if it's a cross pollination, the chances of the pollination are what? Little less comparatively. So as I told you, for the cross pollination to happen, there are certain agents for it. Okay, so simple agents are abiotic, it may be, that is living, or either non-living. So let's see what are the agents of cross pollination. Okay, so basically two agents, biotic and abiotic. So let's see the first one, abiotic agents. So in this first one which you have is what? Anemophily. So what is anemophily? Anemophily means when a pollination takes place by wind, then it is known as what? Anemophily. So if you see any agents, like if you take water, wind, insects, birds, anything if you take, for this particular cross pollination to happen, that flower should have certain characteristics. Then and then only the pollination will take place. For example, now we are seeing what? Anemophily. So anemophily means what? It is carried out by wind. Correct? So if that flowers has to be pollinated by wind, what are the features of the flower? First thing is what? They should have large amount of pollen grains. Plus those pollens should be what? Small, should be small, light, dry and smooth. Okay, so whatever female flowers are there, they should have large feathery stigmas. So why large feathery stigma? So that they can easily catch the pollens. Catch the pollens. Okay, so whatever these kind of flowers are there, they usually what? Having a long and versatile stamen. And the examples which we can take over here is coconut, papaya, or you can even take wheat, maize. So this is via the wind. Second one, is hydrophily. Hydro means water. So here the pollination will take place via water. So basically, you will say that obviously all the aquatic plants will be hydrophilous, but no, some are also anemophilous, some are hydrophilous. Okay, so not all the aquatic plants pollinate by or the pollination process takes out by hydrophily or this one. So how it is if suppose the plant is inside the water, means if the aquatic plants are inside the water, then there are chances that it may take place through water. But sometimes if you see the plants are above the water level, okay, because of the long stalk. So at that time they may consider what an anemophily for the process of pollination. Okay, so what are the examples of this hydrophilous thing? So potamogeton, okay, it's a plant which pollinates by the process of hydrophily. Okay, so as I told you, if the pollination is taking place inside the water, okay, or if the plants are pollinated inside the water, then they are considered as hypohydrophily. This is nothing but inside the water. But if it's outside, it is called as epihydrophily. That is outside the water. So here you can take the example Jostera and here Vallisneria. Okay, so apart from this ornithophily, like that, many types are there. Okay, depending upon which agent is going to pollinate. Then comes the biotic agents. Okay, biotic means living. Biotic agents, in which the first one is entomophily. So entomophily means insects. Insects will bring out the pollination, or it's also called as insect pollination. So if you consider the insect pollination, about 80% of pollination happens via what? Insects. That may be beetles, butterflies, any small insects which are there. So usually what are the characteristics of an entomophily flowers are? Obviously for an insect to get attracted, how should be the flower? First of all, it should be brightly colored. It should have fragrance, or you can say sweet smell, and it should also produce what? Nectar. Okay, so usually these kind of flowers, their features are what? They will produce low, or you can say less pollen grains. Okay, and usually this pollen grains has a sticky enzyme. Okay, so that they will stick to the body of the insects, whoever is carrying that particular thing. Whereas if you consider the stigmas of these flowers, they will be long, rough, and sticky. Okay, so what will happen is when the insect comes to the flower for the nectar, whatever the pollen grains are there, they will attach to the, because it's sticky, that pollen grains are sticky in feature, so they will get attached to the body, and then again the same pollen grain, when it goes and sits into other flower, it will take this pollen and it will go for the fertilization process. So this is how an entomophily or insect pollination happens. Okay, so next one is ornithophily. So ornitho means birds. Okay, so basically the small birds do this type of pollination. For example, hummingbird. Okay, sometimes even sunbird. Many types of birds which frequently visit the flowers. Okay, they carry out this ornithophily process. So obviously, like insects, birds also need what? Some kind of features on that particular flower. Like if you consider the birds, because they are little more bigger as compared to the insects, hence they will go for what? A larger variety. Okay, plus it should be brightly colored, plenty of nectar they should produce, and the quantities of pollen should be large. So large quantities of pollen. So what will happen is, if you consider a hummingbird, okay, so hummingbird, what it will do? It will go, okay, it will suck the nectar. So during that time, what will happen is, when it is sucking the nectar, half of the body weight of the bird, okay, it will be on the nectar. So because of that, when the body is touching this particular flower, automatically this pollen grains will stuck to the bird, and when it goes to the other flower, it sheds its pollen grains over there. So same process, but there it is insect, here it is birds. Then in the same way, if it's happening by bats, then it is called as chiropterophily. Okay, if it's taking place by bat, then it is called as chiropterophily. Or one more thing is there, which is called as malacophily. So malacophily means when snails, okay, the creepy creatures like snails, when they carry out a pollination, basically the plants which are near to the land or the surface. Okay, so on those types of plants, the pollination is taken care by the snails, or you can say slugs also. So that is called as what? Malacophily. Okay, so these are what basically how the process of the pollination takes place. Because only if the pollination happens, then only the flowering or fertilization process will take place.